I praise you, Father, because you have hidden these things from the wise and learned and revealed them to little children. Now that's the sovereignty of God. And Jesus, as the wisdom of God, as the personification of God's good plan and the executor of that plan, praises Him for His inscrutable will to reveal to some and to hide from others. All things have been committed to me by my Father. And then He invites. He says, come to me, all you who are weary and heavy laden. And whoever comes will receive comfort from Him. And they'll receive rest. They'll receive His yoke, His good yoke, His easy burden. But although He asks us to do a lot, chapter 10, He did ask for a lot in Christian mission. On the other hand, it's also true that He makes it easy for us. And He carries the ultimate burdens for us Himself. We've seen already that the gospel story begins and ends with conflict. Herod, at Jesus' birth, already wanted to kill Him. Satan tried to tempt Him. Jesus' first sermon in Nazareth, the people tried to throw Him off a cliff. Very early in all four Gospels, we have hints of the opposition of the Jewish leaders. And we see things heading toward the cross. Why were the Pharisees so angry with Jesus? Desecration of the Sabbath. He said, the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath, and they knew who He meant. Okay, He exposed their hypocrisy. He not only said it, but He showed it. His claims distressed them. His implicit claims of deity especially. Might there have been some jealousy for their place as the leaders? Yes. Jesus did all sorts of things that violated their ideas of righteousness and also their ideas of wisdom. You notice He associated with women, don't you? His association with sinners was certainly grievous to them. Why does He eat with tax collectors and sinners? The way Jesus treated the law surely bothered them. You have heard that it was said by those long ago, quoting the Old Testament, largely. And of course, Jesus doesn't seem to have shown much reverence for the temple, criticized it, and its officers, criticized them. Matthew chapter 12. And here we have the disciples, 12:1, going through grain fields. Notice it doesn't say Jesus did it. And picking some heads of grain and eating them on the Sabbath. And the accusation from the Pharisees who are in the vicinity, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath. Now, what did they do that was wrong exactly? They worked. The problem is not that they walked through somebody's fields and took the food. That was okay. The law of God allows that in Deuteronomy. Well, Jesus says, okay, let me explain it to you. First of all, do you know that there are some things more important than punctiliar obedience of the letter of the law? For example, David and his companions did what was unlawful, verses 3 and 4, when they took bread that only the priests were allowed to eat. Second, moving a little bit closer to the case at hand, the priests desecrate the Sabbath, a strong word used there in the Greek, incidentally. It's the word that's usually translated blaspheme, by working on it when they offer the sacrifices. And you just think about it a little bit. They sacrificed bulls and goats. You think about killing a bull. Drag that carcass around, throw it up in the altar. I mean, these animals are big, they're heavy. He says, there is one greater than the temple here. The temple is a representation of the presence of God. Jesus is the presence of God. Therefore, if the priest's act is justified, so is my disciples' act. They need to eat so they can help me. The prophets would have told you about this. God desires mercy, not sacrifice. That is to say, mercy over ritual. The Son of Man, Jesus says, is Lord of the Sabbath. Well, right from there, Jesus goes in verses 9 to 13 on to a synagogue where a man with a shriveled hand is there, and they're watching him. And Jesus says, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath? And seems like they don't even answer him. Jesus tells what he thinks. He says, if any of you has a sheep and it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, won't you take hold of it and lift it out? Now the answer to that is yes, they would. They would. That was you were allowed to help an animal on the Sabbath day, and that was part of their understanding. But how much more valuable is a man? They don't answer that either, so far as we know. Jesus simply goes ahead and says, stretch out your hand, heals the man, and we read plainly the Pharisees went out and plotted how they might kill Jesus. He's saying he's in charge, he will determine, and he goes ahead and does what he wants without even listening to them. So they're angry. Then he goes on to say that all this opposition that he's receiving is fulfilling what Isaiah said. Here is my servant, verse 18 of chapter 12, whom I have chosen, the one I love, in whom I delight. I'll put my spirit on him. He will proclaim justice to the nations. We get a hint. His ministry will continue, and it will go to the nations. Did you see that just real quick in verse 18 and then getting 21? In his name, the nations will put their hope. If Israel rejects, then I'll go to the nations. He will still lead forth or thrust justice to victory. Not by crushing others. Nonetheless, he will. That word lead justice to victory is a very strong word. He will propel justice to victory. He will drive it to victory. He will conquer. But not by simply crushing others. Verses 22 to 37, Jesus heals a demoniac, and that leads to an escalation of the conflict. Verse 23, could this be the Son of David? Could this be the deliverer whom we await? Could this be God's servant? The Pharisees say, no. The way he's doing this is by the power of Satan. Now, Jesus, of course, has to answer that. And his essential answer is, this is foolishness. And this is where, of course, Abraham Lincoln got his house divided metaphor. A house divided against itself cannot stand. What kind of folly would it be for Satan to drive out Satan? He would be destroying his own household. It's illogical, this accusation that you level against me. What it means is, the kingdom of God has come upon you. And then he says to the crowds, really to everybody who's there, now you need to make a decision. Because if you're not with me, you're against me. If you don't line up with me, you're against me. Quiet support, quiet approval, which is the way a lot of the Jews did it, is not enough. As for the Pharisees, I tell you, every sin and blasphemy will be forgiven men, but the blasphemy against the Spirit will not be forgiven. The split deepens when Jesus goes on to make a few more comments about it. He says the real reason why they say these things, 12:33 to 37, is because they're bad trees. Because they're a brood of vipers. And you can't bring... A good man brings good out of the good stored up in his heart, and an evil man brings evil out of the evil in him. You say what's in you. If someone curses and says hateful things, it's because there's hatefulness in their heart. This is to be revealed from the heart. Now, some people say, some Pharisees came right after that and said, now, Jesus, we want to see a sign from you. Now, this is galling because they just saw a sign. And they said, he does it by the power of Satan. So Jesus, having given them enough signs already, including the paralytic, whom some of them saw and others heard about, surely, being raised after Jesus forgave the sins. Jesus says, I'm not going to give you any sign except for the sign of Jonah. Now, what on earth is the sign of Jonah? What signs did Jonah perform that proved that he was a prophet? The answer is none. No sign. He just preached. That's not a sign, though. That's a word. He was in the belly of the great fish for 3 days. So it's not, when we talk about the sign of Jonah, we're not talking about a sign that Jonah performed. We're talking about the sign that Jonah himself is. The sign of Jonah is Jonah. Jonah was the sign. His disappearance and reappearance is the sign. What Jesus is saying, the next sign you're going to get is me. Not something you see me do, but me. When I die and rise, that'll be your sign. But sometimes religious leaders can be the strongest opponents of the true gospel. It's a religious man, a religious woman who can be sure in their own mind about God and resist it most strenuously, because the pagan, the agnostic, doesn't even know enough to truly oppose sometimes.